We might be living in an age where we don't really need banks anymore. Most of our banking is done online, leaving the buildings which used to house all of our money with little purpose. They're closing down at record rates, which is a shame, because some of them are beautiful buildings. Whether they're standing abandoned or they've already found themselves a new purpose, in this video, we're looking at some of the most stunning former bank buildings the world has to offer. The vaults of large banks used to hold millions of dollars worth of cash and valuables, so it seems absurd that one could be bought for $1. But that's exactly what happened to a forgotten bank from the 1920s in the south side of Chicago, USA. There was a reason it was available so cheaply, though. It was rotten all the way through, with a collapsing roof and crumbling walls. The former Stony Island Savings and Loan Building was destined for demolition until a visionary artist called Theaster Gates decided to unlock the building's potential. His $1 purchase bought him 20,000 square feet of space, and he turned it into the Stony Island Arts Bank. Pieces of the broken walls and ceiling have been carefully preserved to maintain the connection between the past and the present, but it now counts exhibits such as the entire vinyl archive of legendary DJ Frankie Knuckles among its permanent exhibitions. Gates says his project is intended to become a repository for African American culture and history. The Ninth National Bank in Philadelphia belongs to a whole different era in banking. It's been decades since anybody built a bank this big, or anybody needed to. This impressive, vaulted building is a part of the skyline in this part of Philly, but the last 50 years of its existence have been a very sad story. It closed down during the 1970s, and nobody's known quite what to do with it since. In that time, weather, nature, and vandals have robbed it of its former glory. The bones of the building still look beautiful, but the interior is badly damaged, and nature is invading it at every corner. Various plans have been forged to redevelop it over the years, only to fail at the last moment. A few years ago, a women's refuge group had a license to turn it into sheltered housing, but neighbors objected to the idea of the building being pulled down for that purpose. The problem is the neighbors don't have the money to buy it, and nobody else is interested in restoring it. As of 2019, it's still on the market for $1.8 million, which feels overpriced for a piece of real estate nobody's used in half a century. Everybody in Alabama knows that the City Federal Building was constructed for financial purposes, but has long since been turned into condos. The skyscraper, which stands 327 feet tall, was once the largest building in the southeast of America. What very few people know, not even the residents, is that there's still an abandoned bank in the footprint of the building. Even though the paint is peeling and the rot has set in, it's still astonishing to look at, especially the huge vault door. This is the Jefferson County Savings Bank, which opened along with the rest of the building in 1913, but closed down only 2 years later. The building around it has changed beyond all recognition in the 100+ years since then. But time hasn't passed for the forgotten bank. It allows us a rare glimpse into the kinds of vaults and storage mechanisms that people used to safeguard their goods generations ago. There are currently whispers that the bank will be turned into a luxury restaurant, but that the fixtures and fittings will become part of the decor. At 205 Yonge Street in Toronto, you'll find the old 4-story Bank of Toronto building, which has stood proudly since 1905. It looks more like a city hall than a building, and it's proudly topped off by an impressive dome. Sadly, the dome is fake. It's solid, and there's no way into it from the outside, but it's wonderful to look at. It's thought that the architects who designed it had the famous Pantheon of Rome in mind when they came up with the plans. Although it was briefly populated by squatters, the interior still looks as grand as it must have done over a century ago, with intricate swirling patterns on the marble walls and columns. It didn't make it through the 20th century as a bank. It served as the headquarters of the Toronto Historical Board for many years, but its last occupants were Heritage Toronto, whose logo still adorns the side of the building, even though they haven't been here since 2001. It remains for sale, in the hope a caring new owner can be found. Moving away from North America for a moment, we find the Old Bank Hotel in the wealthiest district of Oxford in England. Its name tells you everything you need to know about what it used to be and what it is now. The grand building has stood on this spot since 1775, and for over 200 years, it was a bank. At one point, it was the largest branch of Barclays Bank in Oxford. Everything changed in 1998, when an art collector made an offer to buy it from Barclays and turn it into a 5-star hotel. Barclays sold up, and the millionaire art dealer kept his word. Now it offers 42 well-equipped rooms and a top-class restaurant within its footprint, as well as an art gallery featuring works from some of Britain's greatest 20th century painters. Back when it was a bank, staff used to complain regularly that they heard and saw the ghost of a woman called Prudence Burcote, who died in a house that stood on the land here before the bank was built. Tales of her roaming the vaults were a popular local legend, but there have been no sightings since the bank became a hotel. Maybe she doesn't approve of its new purpose. So much has been done to the Bristol Harbour Hotel in Bristol, England, that you'd hardly know that it used to be a bank. All of that changes when you enter the restaurant, though, when the old shape and features of the former trading hall become immediately apparent. The building used to be the largest and best-looking branch of Lloyd's Bank in the city, but was redeveloped into a gorgeous boutique hotel in 2016. The restaurant isn't the only intelligent use of what used to be banking space here. A few floors down, what used to be the vault is now a spa. The developers had to be careful about how they reshaped their new property. The bank, built in the 1840s, is a Grade II listed building, and therefore has protected status. Its original builders based the design on the Library of St. Mark's in Venice, which is 200 years older. That explains the classic design style. Including the Bank of England in this list is cheating a little bit, because the Bank of England still exists, but part of its original headquarters has now been converted into a museum, allowing visitors to experience what life at the bank was like when it opened, more than 300 years ago. Unsurprisingly, it's one of the oldest banks in the world, having opened its doors for the first time in 1694. It's seen a lot of change and upheaval since then. Some of the more surprising exhibits within the Bank of England Museum include pikes and muskets, which were used to defend the bank and its deposits when they came under attack during less civilized times. As you might expect from one of England's oldest and richest financial institutions, the building that houses the museum looks like a palace, fit for the Queen herself. That's probably why she looked so at home when she turned up to reopen it as a museum in 1988. Some of the famous people who have walked through these halls and done their banking here include Lord Nelson and George Washington. If we've just told you that the Bank of England is the oldest bank in England, then what could the Old Bank of England possibly be? Well, somewhat confusingly, it's another old bank building which used to belong to the Bank of England, but isn't actually as old as the building that the Bank of England Museum is housed in. It's also a Grade II listed building, having been designed in the Grand Italianate style by Sir Arthur Blomfield when it opened in 1886. These days, it's a pub, and it has been since 1994. But prior to that, it sadly stood empty for almost 20 years, having served as a bank from 1888 through to 1975. 2 decades of abandonment was no way to treat a building which, if the legends are to be believed, was once the temporary storage facility of the Crown Jewels. There aren't many bars or pubs for Londoners to go to which have a more prestigious history or location than this. The Old Bank of England is at 194 Fleet Street, almost exactly at the point where the City of London connects to the City of Westminster, with the press on one side and the politicians on the other. Looking at Hotel Gotham on King Street, Manchester, It's hard to imagine that it's ever been anything other than a hotel. Remarkably, even though it's as quirky and showy a building as you'll ever see, it started off life as a bank. The Midlands Bank were the original tenants, and they commissioned Edwin Lutyens to create a memorable building for them. The Art Deco delight he completed and opened in 1935 certainly didn't disappoint. Although it's called the Hotel Gotham now, this isn't actually a Gothic design. The majority of the buildings around it when it was built were neo-Gothic, and the Midland Bank stood out by contrast, just as Lutyens wanted it to. Lutyens drew upon some of the work that he'd done when designing vast swaths of New Delhi during 1912, and the unusual scaling of the tiers can be seen all over the Indian city. Midlands and their successors, HSBC, stayed in the building until 2008, when they decided to move to another part of Manchester for commercial reasons. Today, the five-star Hotel Gotham occupies only the top 5 floors. The banking hall is a restaurant owned by British celebrity chef Jamie Oliver. Heading back down south to London from Manchester, the Wolseley is a classy and elegant building. If we told you that it's now a restaurant, you can probably easily see that from a quick glance. If we told you that it used to be a bank and was used by Barclays for almost 75 years, you could probably see that too. What's harder to believe is that someone would design such a breathtaking building with the idea that it would be a car showroom. But that's how this site at 160 Piccadilly got started. Wolseley Motors had it built in 1921, but ran into financial difficulties not long after. Perhaps it's because they were spending millions of dollars on unnecessary lavish car showrooms. Barclays became the next owners in 1927 and stayed there until 1999. Next up came a short-lived Chinese restaurant, and then the current restaurant in 2003. The original architect of the car showroom was William Curtis Green, who laid out the floor in black and white marble and the walls in Portland stone. He was called back to repurpose it for Barclays a few years later, but kept many of his original design ideas in place, and so they remain today. The Barnet National Bank building in Jacksonville, Florida was once a source of great local pride. It was a local banking business that went toe-to-toe with the biggest banking names in the country. Now barely anybody remembers it, and its former skyscraper is welcoming its first new occupants in 30 years. The bank was founded in 1877, although it would be a few more years until the skyscraper was built. William Boyd Barnet ran it almost as a sole trader at first, slowly and patiently growing his business over time. By 1926, William's son Byron was in charge of the company, and it was he who ordered the construction of the iconic building. At the time, it was the tallest building in Jacksonville. 3 years later, the Great Depression happened, but the bank managed to cling on and ride it out. Poor choices of acquisitions and mergers became an issue during the 1970s and 1980s, and sadly by 1997, it was all over for the company. The building was bought by the Bank of America, but fell into disuse and disrepair. Only in the last 5 years has it been restored, with the University of North Florida Center for Entrepreneurship based here, along with several apartments and rental offices. If ever a bank building should have been treated better, it was the Glass Bank in Florida, or to give it its correct name, the First Federal Savings and Loan Building, which was a landmark of Cocoa Beach. It was at the cutting edge of modern design when it opened in 1961. Unusually for a bank, it had a restaurant and nightclub on its top floor, which was a favorite of many celebrities of the era. The glass that gave the building its nickname was slowly replaced over the years, as Florida's hurricanes had a habit of shattering it and requiring expensive replacements. Eventually, the windows started being replaced by concrete, and the building lost much of its charm and appeal. Businesses started moving out, and by 2004 the only tenant was a man named Frank Wolf, who owned the penthouse apartment. This posed a problem. Wolf kept his apartment immaculately clean and powered, but the rest of the building started falling apart and was found to contain asbestos. A protracted legal battle followed as the city tried to force Wolf out so they could bulldoze the old bank, which ended with Wolf's suicide. The city had got their wish. A man was dead, a beautiful bank was obliterated, and now all that remains is an empty lot. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!